After that previous episode of X-Men, you really have to wonder how are they going to follow up on that? Very mixedly, as it turns out. X-Men 97, episode 6, Life Death Part 2, except that's only about half of it. It's very it's very weird. It's even weirder to me now looking back at episode 4, which was split in half between Motendo and Life Death Part 1, where effectively this also has two stories, but they intercut between them instead of splitting it half and half. Why didn't I mean, I guess in theory there's slightly more thematics to this because there's a connection in terms of what length someone is willing to go to for someone that they care about, except, Storm's trying to save Forge from dying, and Charles, okay, we'll get back to Charles. Let's start with Storm and Forge. Because that is decently done. I feel like, well, much like with Life Death Part 1, honestly, I think they either should have just crammed these two parts into one thing, just made it one continuous episode, maybe with a little extra time like episode 5 had, or like legitimately make them both two parts and make each part the full thing of the episode. Give us a full episode to really get invested in Forge and Storm within the context of this show, as opposed to, in my case, having lingering affection for the pairing largely from the comics. And then, really dig into the tension and Storm's pain and self-doubt, which this episode does well. It's just it doesn't land as well as it should, not only because it kind of could use some more time devoted to it, but also because it has to share the space with another story. But again, we'll come back to that. As far as Storm's actual story, like it conveys what she's going through really well. Her doubts, her fears, it brings up her claustrophobia and depicts that pretty well. I think so. And it works. It works. And in and of itself, if Life Death was actually the entirety of this, that would be a decent wind down episode. Now, when I say wind down episode, following something really massive, really game changing, it's pretty common that you don't try and maintain that momentum all the way through, and you definitely don't try and one up it. You have a cool down period following it, so you give both the characters and the audience a chance to catch their breath a bit. This is part of why, back when Game of Thrones was good, most of the biggest stuff happened not in the final episode of a season, but the episode before. That was your big, massive blowout stuff, and then the episode after that was your wind down. So Life Death as a wind down story works decently. And I don't think it was a mistake to do a wind down episode following episode 5. I think that was probably a good way to go. And jumping to a character who was not present and is not yet aware of what happened on Genosha, yeah, that's a pretty good way to do it, because I still care about Storm. She had a compelling thing that she was going through. So that was a good place to go for me to get to see her work on overcoming her own personal stuff before realizing the greater tragedy that has occurred. That's all real good. And then there's Charles. I aggressively do not care. I don't care at all. And it's not just because I've never found the romance between Lilandra and Charles interesting. I haven't, for the record. But that's not the only problem here. The big, massive... So, all right. If you are going to bring back a character who is gone from the show, whether they're presumed dead or not, and reminder, Charles is, but if you're going to bring back a character who's been gone from the show, one of two things needs to be the case. Either you have to have a really compelling story to tell with them, or I need to have really missed them. And neither is true. I haven't missed Charles. Not that Charles was a bad character back when the show was its original incarnation. I mean, he was as good as everybody else. I've said before, I think that original run of the X-Men animated series does not hold up very well at all. There's a lot of nostalgia blinders on, but I haven't missed him in this. I would actually argue that the stories have been better and more interesting and more compelling for his absence. So not only have I not been missing him, I actually think the stories are improved with him not being there. Not to say that, like, Charles shouldn't be part of the X-Men. No, he should be part of their story. But in terms of the immediate narrative they're dealing with, it's usually more interesting when he's gone. And that's definitely been the case in this season. And so that fails at the hurdle of I haven't missed him. I haven't been going, where's Charles? I miss Charles. It's incomplete without Charles. No, it was giving me good stuff without him. And what is he bringing with him? Cosmic nonsense. Now, granted, this is also partially a pre-existing bias on my part. I don't really like it when the X-Men get involved with cosmic stuff too much. I think the extent of their cosmic interaction should begin and end with the Dark Phoenix. I think that's as far as they should go. That's part of why I don't like Charles's romance with Lilandra. It's part of why I don't find the Brood that interesting, aside from the fact that they're just complete knockoffs of, Alien. But they have enough. The X-Men have enough. They have a massive cast. They deal with both large and personal stakes. They have time travel, so they have plenty of weird, bendy stuff. There's practically interdimensional things with some of the things they deal with. When you get out and involve space and involve the cosmic end of things, I don't think it adds anything. And I've generally found that to be the most boring stuff the X-Men ever get wrapped up in. I think the X-Men work best kind of self-contained, a bit in their own bubble. Not completely ignoring the rest of the Marvel Universe, but to be honest about it, X-Men is big enough and has enough going on and enough dynamics and characters, certainly. I mean, they've had to purge massive swaths of mutants on a semi-regular basis to deal with the fact that there's so many of these things, but they support all their own stories. You don't have to keep expanding it out. The rest of the MCU can expand out. I'm not MCU. Jeez, I've just gotten used to calling Marvel the MCU. But the rest of whatever Marvel stuff, that can expand out into space. The X-Men don't benefit from that. At least I don't think they do. And some people must like the cosmic stuff with the X-Men, I guess. I just don't, though. I don't. I don't think that the characters or the stories that they are good for benefit from that kind of increase in scope and scale. And nothing that went on with this, they literally go out of their way to call it, star-crossed lovers plot between Charles and Lilandra. I don't care. I don't. And not to mention the fact that him getting involved with an empress of a empire at war that isn't looking to make peace but is looking to conquer also doesn't fit him. They kind of touch on that a little bit within the episode with him, lecturing them about the way that they expand their empire and sort of calling it out. But at the same time, it's okay, but you still want to marry this woman. And this is her job, is to lead this empire. That is the expectation of what she's going to do. What? It's weird to me that I mean, it's one of the many reasons that the romance between him and Lilandra, I have a hard time buying and definitely am not interested in. I think I said, no, I know I said before, that episode 4 was probably the weakest episode. This has taken its crown. Because in that one, I found the Jubilee story to be light and fluffy and not especially interesting. It was fine. And Life Death felt it should have been Life Death Part 1 felt like it should have been the whole episode. But, there were problems with it, but I didn't think either half of it was bad. It just didn't quite pull together. I think the stuff with Charles here is bad. Not in a, this is actively horrible and it's ruining the show way, but in a, you are spending time on something that I truly do not care about. And while it worked cutting to Storm, because it gave me a breather from everything else, and a character that we already know, and we already have a reason to be invested in what she's currently going through, to jump to a character who I was happy to presume was dead. This is, so, I think I've said before, and if I haven't said it, I should have, the main strength of the original animated series was in retelling the stories from the comics. And it largely did that pretty loyally. I mean, again, boiled down, simplified, but it stuck pretty close to the core beats of whatever stories it felt like telling. And I think at times that, while it was its greatest strength, was also partly to its detriment. Because one of the problems with the X-Men in the comics is a long history of undoing, rolling back, and retconning stuff that was interesting into something that's more boring. And I think bringing Charles back is a good example of that. Yes, I know Charles has been presumed dead in the comics before. Yes, I know he has come back before. Yes, I know he's actually been out in space and has wooed a space empress before. I know that's all in the comics. I don't care. I don't think it was good in the comics either. So this is where the loyalty to source material kind of bites the show in the ass. And I'll bring this up again if they resurrect Gambit, because I know the X-Men are notorious for all coming back to life at some point or other. But seriously, I understand that in the comics, these characters die but then come back. In the show, have the balls to do what the comics didn't and let them stay dead. Yeah. So that, like, this is why it's the worst. It's not just because the Charles stuff is boring and uninteresting and frustrating. It heralds to me like the stuff that has the potential to drive me crazy across the rest of this season and possibly future seasons. Because sometimes sticking to the comics means going places you wouldn't expect a cartoon to go. Other times sticking to the comics means doing stuff that wasn't a good idea in the first place. And definitely its original version didn't have the guts to actually tell original stories, at least to the best of my knowledge. And I really hoped this one would. And I'm not sure it does. And that worries me. I'm hoping the next episode will perk me back up, but this kind of bummed me out. I'm going to be honest. X-Men 97. Episode 6. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. That all helps, but don't worry too much about it. Take a relaxed attitude around here when I'm not getting annoyed at the things I watched. You can come on back next time you need a break. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Fare Forit, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Jen, AuntieKate808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Bluhuvian, Pao Barabajago, and Mara G. Thank you for your support and for keeping me and these guys fed. What are you doing?